Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to get up and help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen that better part, which will not be taken away from her." And this is the gospel of the Lord. I'm not going to embarrass the few kids who are here by dragging them up for all of you this morning. That's not fair, is it? Besides, I'll get you out a little earlier this way. If you were here last week, you heard a very excellent sermon which Evelyn Henson brought in front of you the story of the Good Samaritan, and in so doing, she needled us through into the personalities of all the four people described in the parable and the story itself. And it wasn't just that we were looking at it in a new and refreshed way. I think we've always done this. But the whole idea was, in that lawyer's question, who is my neighbor? The story had to come forward because any explanation to it had to be run through actuality. It had to run through a story of human beings at their worst and at their best. And as such, we were left with that decision of how that would hover over our heads. And I thought about it, but I didn't give it much more thought until this past Friday, and I think we're all aware of what President Obama did in getting on television and the news media and describing to the public what he felt and what he went through as a black man in growing up. It was revelatory to many people, but I don't think it was that revelatory to most black men especially. It occurs to me that as he was speaking, I had to ask myself, placing myself in the story of his life, just as Evelyn asked us to place ourselves in the story of the Good Samaritan. And he said, "I don't think there is a black man who has ever gone into a department store who at one time didn't know that he was being followed." And I asked myself, did I ever feel that way? And the answer is no, I've never felt that way. Not by virtue of the fact have I ever gone into a store, looked around, and felt by virtue of the fact that because I was white, I should be followed. And so what I was being introduced to is thinking in a new way, as the saying goes, to walk in somebody else's shoes, and I didn't feel comfortable. It was very difficult to do because I had never experienced it. So as I looked at the text for this morning coming out of the gospel and this story that many of you heard over and over, the Martha and Mary's story, asking myself, well, what is the continuation that we have here out of the Good Samaritan? And as I looked at that yesterday's or last week's scripture, the question was, who is my neighbor? And that was answered by what somebody did. And now today, Jesus raises it a little higher, because surely Martha is doing something, and it seems right, and it seems good. Jesus has come, and it is her job, her identity, to provide for him, give him food, to make him feel welcome. And it is Mary who is out of the way sorts, because she is not complying with that image of what a woman would do at that time when a person of Jesus' stature would come. As such, she breaks the mold, and she comes and she sits at Jesus' feet and she listens to what he has to say. And then, audacious as it may seem, Mary comes to try to embarrass her sister right in front of Jesus. And not only that, maybe embarrass Jesus a little bit. Don't you care? What's the matter with you? You should surely know that I and my sister should be waiting upon you and preparing food. This is what we are supposed to do. And it is at that moment when Jesus looks at Mary and says, Mary, you're so worried and you're so distracted by many things. The Greek is wonderful, distracted. It translates a little bit differently. It's like being pulled in several directions at once. Like you can't get your hand on one thing without trying to get onto the other. You've always experienced that, especially moms with newborns. Like you're going crazy. Can't get fast enough to do the different things you want to do. And Martha is being pulled in several directions in that sense of frustration. She wants to pull Mary back into her prescription of what a woman is supposed to be doing at that point. She is supposed to be prepping food, getting things ready. She should not be listening. And as such, in this rather patriarchal society, Mary is all of a sudden pulled up and into the world of what you might call the listening men to the rabbi. And to that, Jesus says, Mary has chosen the better part, and it's not going to be taken away from her. And as I thought about that text, I said to myself, how many of us are descriptive of who we are and what our vocation is, in what we do? I mean, isn't it not common when we meet somebody, part of that conversation of getting to know the other person is, what do you do? And that's okay, because the Good Samaritan story raises that what do you do to a high level. This is what you do if you prove yourself to be a neighbor. But this text brings us to an upper level that says, maybe there are those moments in time that isn't what you do, but what you stop doing in order to be quiet and hear something new that may be transformational in your life. And that is Mary, and what is she doing at this very moment? It isn't important in Jesus' mind as to what they're going to feed him. He has come not to have dinner so much as to speak revelatory words. And in speaking those words, maybe, just maybe, getting people to say, I am discovering who I am apart from those external identity factors in my life. And that is so critically important. I think many of you, and perhaps even I know some of you now, have a parent in a nursing home. How many times I have, and I'm sure other clergy, we've gone to nursing homes, and one of the things that we see, especially in an elderly woman, is this. I am seeing in front of me the life cycle ending for a woman who once was a toddler, who grew up, who fell in love, who married, who brought children into the world, who went through multiple new identities as a wife, as a mother, as a provider, as one who puts food on the table for her husband and children, perhaps. And as time has elapsed, each one of those identities are pulled away from her. Her husband has died. She is a widow. She no longer can take care of herself. Her home, where she was a homemaker in its true, real identity, is gone. The children she used to take care of, there's been a role reversal, and now they are in charge of her. If you go into her room, what will you see? Pictures, a few things that are important on a bureau, and perhaps the question that has been given to me so many times when I visited these people, I don't know who I am anymore. All of those identity pointers are taken away. And we have to be able to say something at that point, not just for these people, but also to ourselves, lest we be carried away and being distracted like Martha and all those other things that are secondary points in our life. We cannot do these things in true union with God until we really do discover who we are in terms of our baptism, in terms of being called a child of God. And that has to be renewed over and over again. We can't hear it enough. It is the whole purpose of the church throughout the ages to be able to look at every individual being and saying, before you do anything, you have an identity. And it can't be taken away from you, come hell or high water. You are a child of God. And in that identity, you may add others as you so please. Like the Good Samaritan did, as calling forth of Mary at the feet of Jesus, I need to do this here and now because it's more important than anything else. And I think maybe it's a probably popular and good idea, and I read this in a book, and I thought it was kind of clever. What would happen if tomorrow, at 11 minutes after 2, you had to stop doing what you are doing, that thing that you think describes you perhaps, and simply asked who you are? And what would you come up with? What would be the answer to your own self-question as to what your identity is? Because, you see, there's nothing left of what you created. There's only what God created at that moment. You, in your baptism, as the object of his love. And just stay there for a little bit. Don't walk away from it. It's not all that theological. It's simply a reality of bringing to yourself your own real true identity. Not just for what it now, but that identity that is a promise to take into all eternity. What you shall become is already what you are. Purely by the grace of God. Try it. Try it right now in your mind. Tomorrow is Monday, right? For those of you who are going to work, those of you who will be home, those of you who have plans, choose a time, mark it down and take it with you. 9:16 a.m., 2:33 p.m. Promise yourself to stop whatever you're doing at that moment and ask yourself, is what I am doing the true mark of who I am as I take up time and space? Or is there more that defines who I am? Is there more that lies deep in the life that's grace? Describes who you are here and now for all time to come. No question, Mary chose the better part because at that moment in time, she knew that her other identity of the food preparer had to be put aside because there were more important things to do. I guess the trick of discovering our Christian identity is to be able at any time, at any point of where we are, perhaps to stop at that moment and say, whatever I'm doing is not necessarily who I am as a human being. Rather, I am defined in a new and radical way. I am the child of God. And although those things that might make me who I am may be taken away, even that final mortality by death itself, that definition is eternal. And it is good to think about it. It defines what our next move will be in whatever we do. And may God, all his mercy, who gives us these stories out of Christ's mouth and through our gospel, be with us and grace us as tomorrow we mark that time when we will stop and ask, who am I now by the grace of God?